small-town judge thought he was putting a cocky black man in his place, until he found out that man worked for the U.S. Department of Justice. It was a bright Tuesday morning in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking it'll be a good day. The air was thick with humidity, and the traffic along Nicholson Drive moved lazily, everyone half awake, sipping coffee and inching toward downtown. Darius Monroe checked his watch, sighing softly. He had 20 minutes to reach the courthouse. Plenty of time, he thought, easing his silver sedan through a green light. His tie was slightly loose, briefcase in the passenger seat, phone buzzing with messages from colleagues. Nothing unusual, just another workday for a man used to long hours and tight deadlines. But then, flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. A sheriff's deputy was signaling him to pull over. Darius blinked, confused. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't on his phone. He used his signal, rolled to a stop, and waited. His hand rested calmly on the steering wheel, eyes steady on the mirror. The deputy, a stocky man with a sun-reddened face and mirrored sunglasses, approached slowly, one hand on his belt. "Morning, sir," he said flatly. "You know why I stopped you?" Darius shook his head. "I'm not sure, officer." "Was I speeding?" 15 over, the deputy replied. 45 zone. You were doing 60. Darius frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound right. I was behind a truck most of the way. I couldn't even pass." The deputy's tone stiffened. "You calling me a liar?" Darius exhaled slowly, keeping his voice measured. "No, sir. Just saying maybe there's been a mistake." The man's jaw tightened. "License and registration." Darius handed them over without another word. The officer glanced at the documents, pausing on the federal government ID clipped inside Darius's wallet. His brow furrowed, but he said nothing, just muttered something into his radio and walked back to the patrol car. Inside his sedan, Darius tapped his thumb on the wheel. He'd seen this before. Too many times, in fact. The pause, the double take, the silent judgment. It always felt the same, polite on the surface, but heavy underneath. After a few long minutes, the deputy returned, ticket pad in hand. "Here you go," he said. "Court date's next week. Baton Rouge District Courthouse." Darius accepted the paper. "Thank you, officer." "Be careful out there," the man said, his tone clipped, almost irritated. As the patrol car pulled away, Darius stared at the ticket. $275 for speeding. He knew he could pay it and move on, but something about the encounter didn't sit right. The way the deputy looked at him, spoke to him, doubted him before he said a word. He folded the ticket neatly and placed it in his glove compartment. Then he whispered to himself, "No, not this time." That afternoon, Darius filed a request to contest the citation. It wasn't about the money. It was about principle. When the court date arrived a week later, Darius decided to appear in person. He'd been in courtrooms his whole career, but never on the other side of the bench. And he had no idea that the man presiding that day, Judge Raymond Calloway, would turn a simple speeding ticket into something much bigger. But sometimes life has a way of testing your patience before revealing your purpose. The Baton Rouge District Courthouse was buzzing with the usual mix of nerves and impatience. People shuffled in line, clutching paperwork and whispering excuses to each other. Darius Monroe stood quietly near the back, his briefcase in one hand, his other hand resting in his pocket. He wore a navy suit, clean, pressed, nothing flashy. The same kind of suit he wore every day to work at the Department of Justice. But today, he wasn't standing behind a government seal or a polished mahogany desk. He was standing among locals fighting traffic tickets and small fines, waiting for his name to be called. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Raymond Calloway, mid-60s, silver hair slicked back, eyes cold and sharp behind wire-framed glasses. His voice was gravelly and impatient, every sentence laced with authority that didn't invite discussion. He didn't smile, didn't greet the courtroom. He simply said, "Next case." One by one, people approached. Most were dismissed with small fines, a few warnings, and the occasional scolding. Then the clerk spoke. Case 2478, State of Louisiana versus Darius Monroe. Darius stepped forward. His shoes clicked softly against the floor, the sound echoing through the chamber. He set his briefcase down, meeting the judge's gaze. Calloway scanned the file. "Mr. Monroe, says here you were clocked doing 60 in a 45. Yes, Your Honor," Darius said evenly, "but I believe there's an error. I was driving behind a truck the entire time. I couldn't have been going that fast." The judge leaned back, unimpressed. You saying the deputy's radar was wrong? I'm saying it may have picked up the wrong vehicle, Darius replied calmly. A smirk tugged at the corner of the judge's mouth. So the deputy's wrong and you're right. Darius didn't flinch. I'm simply presenting the facts as I experienced them, sir. Judge Calloway exhaled, flipping through the paperwork like he'd already made up his mind. You people always have an excuse, he muttered, almost under his breath, but loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. Darius blinked slowly. Excuse me, Your Honor? I said, the judge repeated, louder this time, everybody has an excuse when they get caught. I'm tired of folks wasting this court's time over a $200 ticket. The air grew still. A few heads turned. The bailiff shifted slightly, uncomfortable. Darius straightened his posture. His voice stayed calm but firm. With respect, Your Honor, I believe I'm entitled to a fair hearing. The judge chuckled. Fair hearing? Son, this isn't federal court. We handle real people here. Folks who actually admit when they're wrong. Darius's jaw flexed slightly. I'm one of those people, sir. Not today, you're not. Calloway scribbled something on the file, then looked up. You can pay your fine at the clerk's desk. $300 total. Don't be late. That was it. No room for discussion. No chance to explain. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. For a moment, Darius just stood there, still as stone. He could feel the heat of humiliation rising, but he swallowed it. He wasn't about to give the judge the satisfaction of seeing anger. Understood, Your Honor, he said quietly. Thank you for your time. He picked up his briefcase, turned, and walked out of the courtroom. As he passed the clerk's desk, he pulled a small, cream-colored card from his jacket pocket. He slid it across the counter toward the young woman behind the glass. She glanced down, expecting a payment card, but froze when she saw the embossed gold lettering. Darius Monroe, Assistant United States Attorney. Below it, the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice gleamed under the fluorescent light. The clerk looked up at him, her mouth slightly open. Oh, my... He smiled faintly. Could you please make sure the judge receives this? She nodded, almost whispering, Yes, sir. Darius turned and walked away without looking back. His steps were slow, deliberate. He'd handled tougher men than Judge Calloway, men with real power, real influence. But somehow, this sting felt more personal, because disrespect wasn't about status, it was about choice. But the thing about choices is, sooner or later, they circle back. The courtroom had thinned out, leaving behind the faint echo of footsteps and murmurs from the hallway. The young clerk, Emily Reyes, still sat behind the counter, staring at the business card Darius had handed her. The gold seal of the Department of Justice shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light, and for a moment she hesitated, wondering if she should show it to the judge right away or wait until the next recess, but curiosity won. She picked up the card, tucked it under the next case file, and quietly approached Judge Calloway's chambers. Inside, Judge Calloway was sipping coffee, half distracted as he scrolled through emails on his phone. Yes, Emily? What is it? He asked without looking up. Sir, the gentleman from earlier, Darius Monroe, he left this for you. She extended the card. Calloway took it absent-mindedly, still scanning his phone. Fine, just leave it on the desk. Yes, sir, she said softly. But as she turned to leave, he finally glanced down. The second his eyes landed on the card, his hand froze midair. The Department of Justice seal was unmistakable. He straightened in his chair, reading the name again. Darius Monroe, Assistant United States Attorney. He blinked twice, suddenly wide awake. Wait, he said. You're sure this is from that man? Emily hesitated, sensing the shift in his tone. Yes, sir. He gave it to me right after you dismissed his case. The judge leaned back slowly, rubbing his chin. Assistant U.S. Attorney, he muttered under his breath. His mind began racing, replaying the entire exchange from earlier, the confident posture, the calm voice, the way Monroe never once lost his composure. He'd thought the man was just another defiant defendant trying to dodge a fine. But now, realization hit like cold water. He hadn't just belittled a lawyer. He'd disrespected a federal prosecutor, one who worked directly with judges far above his rank. Emily stood there awkwardly, unsure if she should speak. Should I file this somewhere, sir? Calloway waved a hand, trying to compose himself. No, no. I'll keep it. Thank you, Miss Reyes. That'll be all. When she left, the room grew quiet. The judge turned the card over in his hands, feeling the weight of it. The name echoed in his head. Monroe. He wasn't stupid. He knew how small his courtroom looked compared to the world Darius operated in. Federal prosecutors didn't deal with speeding tickets. They handled corruption, racketeering, major felonies. People with influence. People who had the ear of the Attorney General. For the first time in years, Judge Calloway felt something he wasn't used to feeling in his own courtroom. Regret. He sank back into his chair, staring at the door as if expecting Darius to walk back in and call him out. But Darius wasn't that kind of man. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any argument. Calloway's thoughts spiraled. Did I say anything I shouldn't have? He whispered to himself. Did anyone hear me? His stomach twisted. He knew exactly what he'd said. He'd crossed the line, not just professionally, but morally. And the worst part was, he hadn't even realized it until now. He stood up, pacing across the room. Assistant U.S. Attorney, he repeated under his breath. Lord help me. Down the hall, Emily whispered the news to another clerk. Within an hour, it had spread quietly through the courthouse. The small-town judge who scolded a federal prosecutor like a schoolboy. By the time Calloway walked out of his chambers, heads were turning. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The same people who once looked at him with deference now looked at him with disbelief. He tried to ignore it, but each glance felt heavier than the last. But embarrassment has a way of planting seeds that pride can't ignore, and soon those seeds were about to grow into something much harder to face. The next morning, the courthouse didn't feel quite the same. Judge Raymond Calloway noticed it the moment he stepped through the side entrance, the faint hush that followed him, the polite half-smiles that faded too quickly. People were talking, and they weren't even trying that hard to hide it. He adjusted his tie, pretending not to notice. Morning, he muttered to the security guard. No response, just a stiff nod. When he reached his chambers, his longtime clerk, Sandra Pierce, was already waiting by the door, coffee in hand. Her face said everything she didn't want to say aloud. He sighed. You've heard, haven't you? Sandra's voice was gentle, careful. People talk, Judge. You know how this place gets. He set his briefcase down and rubbed his temple. What exactly are they saying? She hesitated. That you, might have spoken out of line to a federal prosecutor yesterday? Calloway groaned. Out of line? Please. I've handled hundreds of cases like his. He's the one who came in here acting like he was too good for this courtroom. Sandra didn't answer. He looked up, defensive. What, you believe that nonsense too? I'm not saying anything, Judge, she said quietly, but it's not a great look. Folks are saying he was calm, respectful, that I what? He snapped. She hesitated. That you were dismissive. Calloway's face tightened. He turned toward the window, watching a group of young attorneys chatting across the parking lot. They stopped when they noticed him, pretending to check their phones. He muttered, I've given my life to this court. 30 years. And now people want to judge me for one misunderstanding? Sandra didn't respond right away. She'd known him for 15 years. She'd seen him at his best and his worst. He wasn't a monster, but sometimes he didn't see what others saw. Raymond, she said softly, using his first name, something she rarely did. You've got to understand something. Times have changed. The things you could say 20 years ago, they don't sound the same today. People hear them differently now. He turned, his tone sharp. So now I'm some kind of bigot because I told a man to take responsibility for his speeding ticket? That's not what I said. Feels like it, he grumbled. Everyone's too sensitive these days. Sandra sighed. Maybe. Or maybe people are just tired of being talked down to, especially when they've done nothing wrong. Her words hung in the air. The judge didn't answer. He just sat down, staring at the stack of case files on his desk. The sound of the courthouse carried faintly through the door. Footsteps, murmured voices, laughter from down the hall. It all felt different now, like the building itself was whispering about him. He flipped through a file, trying to focus, but the name Darius Monroe kept flashing through his mind. He looked up the man's record late the previous night. Curiosity, or maybe guilt. Darius had an impressive background. Law degree from Tulane, 8 years with the Department of Justice, known for integrity and professionalism. A man who'd earned everything he had. The more he read, the smaller he felt. He rubbed his forehead, muttering under his breath, "I didn't mean anything by it." But meaning didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. That afternoon, during lunch, he sat in the judge's lounge with 2 of his colleagues. They were polite but cautious, avoiding the topic completely, until one of them, Judge Linda Greer, finally said what everyone was thinking. "Ray, I heard about your little situation yesterday." Calloway set his fork down. "Oh, I'm sure you did." She smiled thinly. "Word travels fast. You might want to be careful. That man, Monroe, he's respected, very respected." He forced a laugh. "I didn't insult him. I treated him the same as anyone else." "That might be the problem," she said, her voice even. "You didn't treat him like anyone else. You treated him like someone beneath you." Her tone wasn't cruel, just honest. He didn't have a comeback this time. Later that day, when he drove home, his wife noticed the change in him immediately. He was quieter than usual, staring out the window at the neighborhood, saying little during dinner. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He managed a half smile. "Something like that. Want to talk about it?" He hesitated. "Maybe tomorrow." But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above him, the same question echoed in his mind, one he couldn't shake no matter how hard he tried. What if I really did judge that man for the wrong reasons? But sometimes life doesn't give you the luxury of hiding from your mistakes. Sometimes it makes you face them in the most public way possible. 3 days later, the federal courthouse in downtown Baton Rouge buzzed with the kind of energy that comes before something big. Cameras outside, reporters murmuring, security tight. It wasn't just another trial. It was a corruption case involving local contractors accused of bribing city officials. Inside the marble hall, Darius Monroe walked with quiet purpose. His leather shoes tapped in rhythm on the polished floor, briefcase in hand, his face calm but focused. He'd done this dozens of times before, but this one was personal. Not because of the case itself, but because of who he'd seen on the schedule that morning. Judge Raymond Calloway, appointed as a temporary overseer for a procedural motion tied to the trial. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor. As Darius entered the courtroom, the crowd shifted. Attorneys whispered his name. His reputation had preceded him. The man known for his integrity, precision, and quiet authority. When Calloway stepped through the side door and took his seat, the courtroom went silent. He was composed on the outside, but inside, his stomach twisted. He saw Darius immediately. The same man he'd talked down to. The same man he'd brushed off like he didn't matter. But this time, Darius wasn't standing before him as a defendant. He was standing in front of him, representing the United States government. The irony hit like a punch to the chest. "Good morning, Your Honor," Darius began, voice steady and firm. "The United States is ready to proceed." Calloway hesitated for just a second too long. "Yes. Good morning, Mr. Monroe," he replied, his voice slightly uneven. Every eye in the room caught the moment, that subtle crack in the judge's confidence. The hearing began. Darius presented his argument methodically, each word deliberate and measured. His posture was confident but not arrogant, his tone respectful but unyielding. Calloway tried to focus on the legal points, but every time Darius spoke, the judge felt smaller. His words from days before replayed in his mind. "You people always have an excuse." He winced inwardly. He wanted to take it back, but words, once spoken, don't return quietly. Darius was discussing an evidence motion when the defense attorney interrupted. "Objection, Your Honor," the defense said. "The prosecution is speculating." Calloway glanced at Darius. Sustained. But Darius didn't flinch. He simply rephrased, calm and unshaken. "Then let me reframe the point, Your Honor. The evidence speaks for itself." There was something about the way he said it, respectful, professional, yet subtly firm, that hit deeper than any confrontation could. By the time the session ended, the courtroom was buzzing with quiet admiration for Darius. The defense team whispered about his poise. The reporters scribbled notes. Even the court staff exchanged glances, sensing the tension between the two men. As the courtroom emptied, Darius gathered his papers and walked toward the exit, but before he reached the door, he paused. "Mr. Monroe," Calloway called out, his voice quieter now. Darius turned, his expression unreadable. The judge cleared his throat. I wanted to say that your argument today was... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. Well presented. Thank you, Your Honor, Darius said simply. His tone was polite, but there was no warmth, just professionalism. Calloway nodded, trying to meet his gaze. You handle yourself well. Always have? Darius smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed cool. Long enough to know respect goes a lot further than authority, sir. The words weren't sharp, but they landed hard. The judge opened his mouth to reply, but Darius turned and left, his footsteps echoing through the corridor. Outside the courtroom, a reporter stopped Darius for a quick question. Mr. Monroe, how does it feel leading this case? He smiled lightly. It feels like justice, real justice, always has its moment. As he walked away, the courthouse doors closed behind him with a quiet finality. Inside, Judge Calloway sat alone for a few minutes longer, staring down at his notes without reading them. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about rulings or case law. He was thinking about respect, how easy it is to demand it, and how hard it is to earn it. He looked at the empty seat where Darius had stood and whispered to himself, he didn't even have to raise his voice. But sometimes, silence says more than any argument ever could, and for the first time, Judge Calloway was listening. That night, Judge Raymond Calloway sat alone in his den, the television flickering faintly in the background. The local news played clips from the federal courthouse earlier that day, Darius Monroe standing behind a podium, speaking calmly to the press. Assistant U.S. Attorney Darius Monroe delivered a strong opening argument today in the government's ongoing corruption case. The judge muted the TV. He didn't need to hear more. He'd already seen enough. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the reflection of his own face in the darkened window. The weight of the past few days sat heavy on his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't see authority looking back at him. He saw a man who'd stopped questioning himself a long time ago. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. His wife, Evelyn, peeked in from the doorway. "You're still up," she said softly. He nodded. "Can't sleep." She walked in, carrying 2 mugs of tea, setting one down beside him. "Because of that prosecutor?" He let out a small laugh, more from exhaustion than humor. "Is it that obvious?" "You've been pacing the floor since dinner," she said, taking a seat across from him. "You said his name twice in your sleep last night." He sighed deeply. "I was wrong, Evie." She tilted her head. "About what?" "About him. About me." He paused, struggling to find the words. "I thought I was being fair, treating everyone the same. But that's the thing, isn't it? I wasn't really seeing him, not as a man, just as someone I thought I already understood." Evelyn didn't rush to fill the silence. She just listened. "I looked at him," Calloway continued, "and decided in seconds who he was. Arrogant, entitled, trying to talk his way out of trouble. I never even considered he might be telling the truth. He reached for his tea but didn't drink it. Do you know how that feels? To realize you've become the kind of man you used to despise?" Evelyn's expression softened. "You're human, Ray. People make mistakes." He shook his head. "No, this wasn't a mistake. This was pride. That's worse." The room fell quiet. Outside, a distant train rumbled through the city, its sound fading into the night. "I spent my career preaching fairness," he said quietly, "telling people to respect the law, to respect others. And yet, in that moment, I couldn't even do it myself." Evelyn reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Then do what's right now. Learn from it. You can't change what you said, but you can decide who you'll be tomorrow." He looked at her hand, the steady warmth of it grounding him. For years, he'd thought wisdom came from age, experience, and authority. But in that moment, he realized something simpler. Wisdom comes from the ability to admit when you're wrong. He whispered. He didn't raise his voice, Evie. Not once. He just stood there and let me make a fool of myself. "Maybe that's what you needed," she said softly. He smiled faintly. Maybe it was. The next morning, when he looked in the mirror before heading to court, something was different. The reflection staring back at him looked older, yes, but also clearer. Stripped of arrogance. Stripped of the mask he'd worn for years. He adjusted his tie and whispered under his breath, "You can do better." It wasn't a prayer, it was a promise. As he walked out the door, sunlight broke through the gray morning clouds, casting a thin beam of light across the front steps. He paused for just a second, letting it warm his face before continuing on. Because sometimes, growth doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence, in reflection, and in the decision to never repeat the same mistake twice. 2 weeks passed before their paths crossed again. The corruption trial was winding down, and the courthouse halls felt heavier with each passing day. Everyone knew the verdict would shake the city, but for Judge Raymond Calloway, the real weight wasn't in the trial. It was in what he needed to say before it was over. That morning, Darius Monroe arrived early, as he always did, calm, prepared, focused. He greeted the court staff with a polite smile, holding his usual black notebook and a thermos of coffee. Across the hallway, Judge Calloway stood near his chambers, watching him through the open doorway. For 3 days, he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say. A dozen drafts of an apology sat crumpled in his desk drawer. None of them sounded right. None of them sounded honest enough. He straightened his robe, took a quiet breath, and stepped out. "Mr. Monroe," he said as he approached. Darius turned, expression neutral but polite. "Judge Calloway." "I was wondering," the judge began, voice softer than usual, "if I could have a moment of your time." Darius studied him for a second, cautious but curious. "Of course." They stepped aside into a small conference room, the hum of courthouse activity fading behind the door. The judge stood by the window, hands clasped in front of him. "I've been meaning to say something since that day in court," Calloway said slowly. "I handled that situation poorly. And that's me being generous with myself." Darius didn't speak. He waited, his silence inviting honesty. "I was rude. Dismissive. I disrespected you," the judge continued, "not just as an attorney, but as a man. And the truth is, it had nothing to do with your case. It had everything to do with me." He looked down briefly, ashamed. "I let arrogance and old habits speak louder than fairness. You didn't deserve that." The air hung still. Darius shifted his weight, eyes steady on the man in front of him. "I appreciate you saying that, Judge," he said finally. "It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong." Calloway nodded slowly. "I've been wrong more times than I care to admit. But this one stuck with me. You handled yourself with more grace than I did with a gavel in my hand." For the first time since their first meeting, Darius smiled, not out of satisfaction, but out of understanding. "I've been in rooms where people tried to make me feel smaller than I am," he said quietly, "but I learned early on, how they see me isn't who I am. That's their reflection, not mine." The judge let the words settle. They carried more truth than any law book he'd ever read. He cleared his throat. "You've got a good way with words, Mr. Monroe." Darius chuckled lightly. "Years of practice, Your Honor." There was a moment of quiet between them. Two men from different worlds, finally standing on equal ground. Calloway spoke again, voice firm this time. "For what it's worth, you reminded me what this job is really about. It's not power, it's not ego, it's respect for the people who stand before this bench, for the law, for the truth." Darius nodded. "That's all any of us want, Judge. To be seen for who we are, not what we're assumed to be." They shook hands, no cameras, no audience, no dramatic music. Just a handshake between two men who had both learned something the hard way. When Darius left the room, Calloway stayed behind for a moment. He looked out the window, watching people move across the courthouse lawn. Defendants, lawyers, janitors, clerks, all of them different, all of them equal in the same sunlight. He whispered to himself, maybe it's not too late to start over. That afternoon, when he took his seat on the bench, his tone was different, measured, kind. He listened more, spoke less. He asked questions before making assumptions. The clerks noticed. So did the defendants. By the end of the day, Sandra Pierce, his longtime clerk, stopped by his chambers. "You sounded different today," she said with a small smile. He smiled back. "Maybe I finally started hearing myself." As the courthouse lights dimmed and the halls emptied, Calloway gathered his papers and paused by the door. He looked once more at the gavel on his desk, a symbol he'd always equated with control. But now, it meant something else entirely. It meant accountability. He turned off the light and walked out, feeling lighter than he had in years. Because real power, he finally understood, wasn't in commanding others. It was in correcting yourself. Sometimes the biggest verdict you'll ever deliver is the one against your own pride. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that respect costs nothing, but means everything.